On a barren, ice-cold planet, a deadly silence hangs over the remains of a once thriving human colony. Commander Serena Quell and her crew have just discovered the impossible. A lone survivor, defying death after 10 brutal days in the frozen wasteland. But the questions don't stop there. What is he hiding? Who is he protecting? As the crew fights against time and the relentless cold, they uncover a terrifying truth buried beneath the snow. Will they find the survivors before it's too late? Or will the chilling secrets of the frozen wasteland remain buried forever? If you're new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. Commander Serena Quell stood silently on the bridge of her warship, her arms crossed, her gaze unwavering. She watched as the vast emptiness of space stretched out before her, the cold darkness dotted with distant stars. The silence was broken only by the hum of the ship's engines and the soft click of a control panel being adjusted. Her violet eyes remained fixed on the stars, but her thoughts were far from peaceful. She had been in command of the Zenix fleet for years, and her reputation as a ruthless and strategic leader was known across the galaxy. She never lost a battle. She never allowed emotions to cloud her judgment. She was a commander who followed orders and focused on victory. The fleet she commanded was the strongest in the sector. The Zenix Empire had claimed victory after victory, and she had played a key role in each one. But even she, the most disciplined of commanders, could feel the weight of the years pressing on her shoulders. Her soldiers looked up to her, not just for her skill in battle, but for her unwavering confidence. She knew how to win, and she knew how to keep her emotions locked away, hidden beneath a steel-like exterior. "Commander," came a voice that interrupted her thoughts. It was an officer, his voice cautious, knowing how easily he could offend her. "We are receiving a distress signal from a human colony on the ice planet below." Serena did not react immediately. Her eyes stayed fixed on the screen that displayed the cold, lifeless expanse of the ice planet. The distress signal meant nothing to her. Humans sent distress signals all the time. Some were real. Some were false. Some deserved help, while others did not. She had seen it all before, and she wasn't about to waste her time on a mission that might be nothing more than a false alarm. "Are they one of ours?" she asked, her voice calm but firm, a tone that left no room for argument. The officer hesitated, clearly unsure of how to answer. "No, Commander," he replied. "The colony belongs to the Terran Union." Serena turned her gaze toward him. "Then why are we even discussing this?" she asked, her voice ice-cold. The officer swallowed, clearly uncomfortable under her gaze. "The signal is unusual," he said. "It's been repeating for 10 days with no response from the surface. There are no other ships in range, and the signal is persistent. 10 days. That was impressive." Serena had heard of colonies suffering attacks or disasters before, but most of them lost power within hours, unable to maintain any kind of communication for long. Yet this signal had continued desperate and unbroken. She paused, considering the officer's words. There had to be a reason for the signal to last this long. "Show me," she ordered. The officer quickly pulled up the signal on the main screen. The voice that crackled through the speakers was weak and distorted, but still recognizable. "This is Raven Dark of Outpost 23, the voice said, the desperation clear. "Our colony has fallen. Please, if anyone is listening, help us." The message was short, a simple plea for help, and yet it carried an unmistakable sense of urgency. The voice faltered at the end, leaving only static in its wake. It was the same message repeating again and again, with no additional information, no details about what had happened, and no coordinates for survivors. It was almost as if the message was coming from a ghost. Serena stared at the screen, her thoughts racing. The colony had fallen, but how had it fallen? Who had attacked them? And why had they been left so alone without even a clear explanation? "What do we see?" she asked, turning to the officer who had been running the scans. The officer worked quickly, bringing up the results. A moment later, the screen flickered, showing a detailed image of the ice planet's surface. The ruins of the colony were visible, scattered across the barren landscape. Entire buildings had been crushed, their walls torn apart by what appeared to be weapons fire. Defensive turrets lay in ruins, shattered and useless. There were no signs of life, just destruction. The officer's voice broke the silence. "The colony is gone." Serena nodded slowly. As she had suspected, the colony had been destroyed. There was nothing left to save. It was another cold reminder of how fragile life could be, how easily it could be snuffed out in the vast emptiness of space. "Then we move on," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. But just as she was about to turn away, another voice interrupted her. It was Lieutenant Cale Orion, one of the younger officers on the ship, and someone who had quickly gained her respect. He was new to the fleet, but his drive and determination had impressed her. Still, he had not yet learned the full weight of command, and his words now held a certain caution. "Commander," he said, stepping forward, "the signal is still active. That means someone is alive down there. Or at least was alive recently." Serena's eyes narrowed. She had no patience for second-guessing, but there was something about the urgency in Cale's voice that caught her attention. She turned slowly, facing him, her expression unreadable. "Speak carefully, Lieutenant," she warned. Cale hesitated for only a moment before speaking again, his voice steady. "Our laws state that all distress signals must be investigated no matter the species." A silence fell over the bridge. Several officers exchanged glances, unsure of how Serena would respond. She could punish Cale for questioning her, for challenging her decision. But instead she simply nodded, her mind already working through the possibilities. "Fine," she said. "We will investigate. But I promise you this, Lieutenant, there is nothing left to save." With that, the warship began its descent through the planet's atmosphere, pushing through violent winds that howled around the ship. The cold was palpable, even inside the heavily shielded vessel. Below them, the ice planet stretched out like a barren wasteland, its jagged mountains looming in the distance. As they neared the colony, the full extent of the destruction became clearer. Every sign of life had been wiped out. The buildings, once home to hundreds of people, were now nothing more than twisted metal and ruins. The colony had fallen, and there was no one left to save. Or was there? As Serena looked down at the desolate landscape, she felt a strange sensation stirring inside her, something unfamiliar. For a moment, just a fleeting moment, she wondered if there was still hope to be found in the frozen wasteland below, but that thought was quickly buried beneath the weight of duty. There was no room for hope. Not in her world. Not yet. "Prepare the drones," she ordered, her voice steady. "Scan for survivors." The team quickly deployed the drones, sending them down to the surface to search for any signs of life. Serena stood motionless, watching the feed from the drones as they scoured the ruins. There was nothing. No movement. No sound. Just the eerie silence of a dead world. But then, just as she was about to turn away, the scanners detected something faint, something unexpected. "Commander," one of the officers said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "We're detecting movement." Serena's heart skipped a beat. Impossible. Commander Serena Quell stood at the front of the observation deck, her eyes glued to the screen as the warship hovered over the wreckage of the human colony. Below, the planet's icy surface was littered with the remnants of shattered buildings and twisted metal. Fires had long since burned out, leaving only blackened scars on the frozen earth. There were no signs of life. No movement. Nothing. Yet, as she watched, her mind raced. Something was off. The distress signal had been clear, someone had survived. But who? And why hadn't they been detected by the sensors? She had never been one to believe in impossible odds. She had always trusted the technology, trusted her crew, trusted her own instincts. But this felt different. The cold, biting wind outside the observation deck seemed to mirror the storm brewing inside her. Her crew had already confirmed that the colony was gone. The distress signal had been the last pulse of a dead world. "So why was she still here looking for something that didn't exist, Commander?" came a voice from behind her. It was Lieutenant Cale Orion, his tone carefully measured. "We've finished the scans. There's nothing left." Serena didn't turn around. She kept her gaze fixed on the screen, watching the motionless planet below. "You're sure?" she asked, her voice betraying a hint of impatience. "Yes, Commander," Cale replied. "The sensors show no life signs, no heat signatures. It's all gone." She closed her eyes briefly, trying to push aside the growing sense of unease that had begun to gnaw at her. It was a feeling she didn't like, a feeling that threatened her resolve. But she had to trust the facts. They had scanned every inch of the planet. There was no one left. But then came the words that stopped her in her tracks. "Except," Cale continued, his voice trailing off. Serena's heart skipped a beat. "Except what?" she demanded, turning sharply to face him. "There's still something," Cale said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "A faint signal, barely detectable. It's coming from beneath the central building under all the wreckage." Serena stared at him for a long moment. "Are you suggesting someone is still alive down there?" she asked, her voice cold but tinged with disbelief. Kyle nodded slowly, his gaze meeting hers. "It's faint, but yes, it's possible." Serena stood frozen, the weight of the decision settling heavily on her shoulders. Her first instinct was to dismiss it, to leave the wreckage behind and move on to the next mission. After all, they had already confirmed there were no survivors. But something in Cale's voice, something in the way he had said it, made her pause. She couldn't explain it, but the possibility of one human survivor, alone in the frozen wasteland, seemed to call out to her. It was a voice she could not ignore. "Fine," she said, her voice steady. "We'll investigate, but this is a waste of time. I expect nothing." Kyle nodded, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Hope, perhaps. Or was it simply the same desperation that had driven him to insist on investigating the signal in the first place? Either way, Serena couldn't shake the feeling that she was making a decision that would lead to something unexpected. The ship began its descent through the violent winds of the planet's atmosphere. The icy surface below looked even more desolate. From this close, snow-covered ground stretched endlessly, jagged mountains looming like dark shadows in the distance. As they neared the colony, the devastation became clearer. The buildings had been torn apart, reduced to rubble. No signs of life. "Commander?" came another voice over the intercom. It was one of the officers on the ground team. "We've found something. Movement. It's faint, but it's there." Serena's heart raced. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't supposed to be real. "Send in a team," she ordered sharply, her voice filled with urgency. Now. Moments later, a team of soldiers disembarked from the warship, their heavy boots crunching through the snow as they made their way toward the central building. Serena watched from the observation deck, her breath fogging up the glass. She wasn't sure what she expected to find. Maybe a body, maybe a faint signal from a broken transmitter, or maybe nothing at all. But when the soldiers radioed back, their voices filled with disbelief, she knew something had changed. "Commander," the voice crackled over the comms. "We've found a hatch. It's beneath the snow. We think it's a storage area, but it's jammed shut." Serena's pulse quickened. "Open it," she ordered, her eyes narrowing. Now. The team worked quickly, using heat tools to cut through the frozen metal. The minutes seemed to stretch into hours as they struggled to pry open the hatch. Serena stood on the observation deck, her eyes fixed on the screen, watching the team's progress. The tension in the air was thick. She could almost feel it, the weight of what they were about to uncover. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the hatch cracked open. The soldiers stepped back, revealing a human figure curled up against the frozen walls. His clothes were torn, his skin pale from the cold, his breathing shallow. He was barely alive. "It's him," one of the soldiers said quietly. "Raven Dark." The same name from the distress call. Serena felt a strange twist in her chest. The human, barely clinging to life, was the very person who had sent the distress signal that had brought them here. How had he survived? Why had he stayed behind when everyone else had died? More importantly, what had kept him alive for 10 days in this frozen wasteland? The medics rushed to his side, administering thermal blankets and hydration tablets. But Serena didn't move. She stood there, watching the scene unfold before her, her mind racing with questions. What was it about this human that had kept him alive? What was he protecting? As the soldiers lifted him out of the hatch and brought him aboard the warship, Serena couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. She had made the choice to investigate the signal. She had made the choice to search for survivors, and now she was faced with a human who had defied all odds, surviving alone in the cold for far longer than anyone thought possible. But even as the medics worked to stabilize him, a part of Serena couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just a desperate survivor. Something was off, and she had a feeling that Raven Dark wasn't the only one who had survived. She just didn't know yet how deep the mystery went. The bond of desperation had been formed, and it would change everything. The warship's med bay was eerily quiet, the steady hum of medical equipment the only sound breaking the silence. "Commander." Serena Quell stood at the entrance, watching as her crew worked to stabilize Raven Dark, the human survivor they had pulled from the frozen wasteland. He was barely alive, his body trembling from the shock of the cold, his skin pale and cracked from dehydration. Yet somehow, against all odds, he had survived, and Serena couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just a lucky escape. The medical officers worked quickly, their hands moving with practiced precision as they hooked Raven up to a series of monitors. Serena's eyes never left him. She couldn't explain it, but something about the human's unyielding will to survive bothered her. She had seen soldiers who had fought to the bitter end, refusing to give up even when their bodies were broken. But there was something different about Raven, something deeper. She glanced at Lieutenant Cale Orion, who had been the one to insist on investigating the distress signal. He stood beside her, his expression unreadable, but Serena could tell that he was just as fascinated by the human's survival as she was. "How is he?" she asked, her voice low. "He's stable for now," Cale replied. "But he's barely hanging on. We need to get him some proper care as soon as possible." Serena nodded, but she couldn't stop thinking about what Raven had said earlier. "I had to protect them," he had whispered, his voice weak, filled with an intensity that left an impression on her. What had he been protecting? And why had he stayed behind when the colony had fallen? "Are you sure there's no one else?" Serena asked, turning to the medical officer who was still working on Raven. "No signs of life anywhere on the surface, Commander," the officer replied, looking up briefly. "We scanned the entire planet. It's just him." Serena's mind raced. She had already been told that the colony was gone, that there were no survivors. But Raven's words, the desperation in his voice, had made her question everything. "Why did you stay behind?" she muttered under her breath. "What were you protecting?" Just then, Raven stirred, his eyelids fluttering. His breath came, in shallow gasps, his body racked with tremors. He slowly turned his head, his eyes focusing on Serena, although they were filled with pain and confusion. "The others," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "They're still alive. You have to save them." Serena's heart tightened. She had heard those words before, but this time something felt different. She couldn't explain it, but the conviction in Raven's eyes made her doubt the cold, hard logic she had lived by for so long. "There's no one else," she said firmly, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her voice. Raven shook his head weakly, a pained expression crossing his face. "No, you don't understand. They're underground. I hid them before the attack. They're still alive. They're running out of air." Serena stared at him, trying to make sense of his words. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to be in control, making decisions based on strategy, based on what she knew to be true. But now she was being forced to question everything. How could this one man have survived so long in the harshest conditions, and why was he so determined to save those who were supposed to be gone? How do you know they're still alive? Serena asked, her voice softer than she intended. She had to know the truth. If there was a chance, however slim, that there were survivors down there, she couldn't ignore it. I can feel them, Raven said, his voice barely above a whisper. I heard their cries. I promised them. I promised I'd keep them safe. There was something in his words, something raw and desperate that sent a chill down Serena's spine. She didn't understand it, but she could sense that Raven wasn't lying. She had seen many things in her career as a commander, but never had she encountered a human who had been so willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of others. For the first time, Serena felt the weight of the decision pressed down on her. She had always followed the rules, cold, calculated decisions that prioritized the mission above all else. But now, in the face of Raven's unshakable will, she wasn't sure if she could continue to do so. Commander, we've analyzed the scans, Lieutenant Kale said, breaking through her thoughts. There's nothing down there, no signs of life. The colony's been wiped out. We should move on. Serena's gaze shifted to Kale. His words were logical, sensible, but they didn't match what she had seen in Raven's eyes. Scan again, she ordered, her voice firm. Kale hesitated for only a moment before obeying. He adjusted the ship's scanners, recalibrating them to detect any hidden survivors beneath the surface. The seconds stretched into minutes as the data poured in. The results were still the same. No signs of life. Commander, Kyle said, his tone softening. It's time to move on. We've done all we can. But Serena wasn't listening. She was lost in her thoughts, her mind working through the possibilities. Raven had survived against all odds. He had risked everything for the people he had promised to protect. And despite the cold, harsh reality of the situation, she couldn't bring herself to turn away. Not yet. Prepare the landing team, she finally said, her voice steady. We're going down. Kale's eyes widened in surprise. Commander, are you serious? Yes, Serena replied, her gaze hardening. We're going to find them, and if they're still alive, we'll bring them back. As the crew scrambled to prepare for the descent, Serena stood alone in the medbay, her thoughts a whirlwind. She had never been one to rely on hope or emotion, but something about Raven's determination, his refusal to give up, had broken through the walls she had carefully built around herself. For the first time in years, Serena felt the stirrings of something she hadn't known she was capable of. Compassion. And, for the first time, she wasn't sure if that would help her or destroy her. The warship hovered above the cold, barren landscape, its massive engines cutting through the thick, icy air. On the bridge, Commander Serena Quell stood with her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the planet below. The ice-covered wasteland stretched out before her, a haunting reminder of the devastation they were about to explore. The decision had been made. She had chosen to pursue the humans' desperate plea, to investigate the possibility of survivors even though every logical part of her mind told her it was a lost cause. But something had shifted inside her, something she couldn't ignore. Commander, we're ready for the descent, came the voice of Lieutenant Kale Orion, breaking through her thoughts. He stood at the helm, his expression calm but filled with the same uncertainty that had been lingering in the air since they received the distress signal. Serena nodded, but her mind was elsewhere, filled with the haunting image of Raven Dark's face, the face of a man who had fought and survived against impossible odds for the sake of others. Let's begin, Serena said, her voice steady, though the weight of the decision pressed heavily on her chest. She had made her choice, and now there was no turning back. The ship descended, piercing through the violent winds of the frozen atmosphere. The icy surface of the planet came into view, the once proud colony now reduced to nothing more than a pile of wreckage. As they neared the central building, the full scale of the destruction became even clearer. Buildings were crumpled, torn apart by some kind of catastrophic event. There were no signs of life, no movement, yet Serena couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, something they had missed. Commander, came the voice of one of the officers on the ground team. We've reached the site, preparing to deploy drones now. Serena nodded and watched as the drones were released from the ship, their small frames cutting through the snow as they scanned the area for any signs of life. The seconds seemed to stretch into eternity as she stood there, her eyes scanning the planet's surface, her mind racing. Was there truly anyone left? Could they really be alive after all this time, buried beneath the rubble? Nothing. The officer's voice came through the comms, sounding just as disheartened as she felt. No signs of life. It's all gone. Serena turned away from the view, frustration building within her. She had expected this. She had known it. But even then, there was a part of her that couldn't give up. She didn't know why, but she couldn't walk away. Raven's words, his desperate plea for help, echoed in her mind. There was something more to this. She just had to find it. And then the unexpected happened. "Commander," the officer's voice returned, this time with a note of disbelief. "We've detected something. Faint movement. Underneath the wreckage. It's still there." Serena's heart skipped a beat. Impossible. She didn't believe. It not for a second. But the officer's tone had changed. There was urgency now, a sense of hope. And that alone was enough to send a surge of adrenaline through her veins. "Get down there," Serena ordered immediately, her voice sharp with command. "Move quickly. We're not leaving until we know what's happening." As the team deployed to investigate, Serena's mind raced. Could it be possible? Could there really be survivors? The chances seemed slim, but the possibility was too important to ignore. Every instinct told her to keep going, to push harder, even if it meant risking everything. She couldn't abandon them, not now. The soldiers, armored and ready, moved swiftly through the ruins, their footsteps crunching through the snow and ice as they advanced toward the central building. Serena stood at the observation deck, her hands gripping the railing tightly as she watched their progress. The weight of the moment was palpable. It felt as though everything hinged on this. Every decision she had made, every rule she had followed had led to this point. Minutes later, the comms crackled to life again. "Commander, we found something," came the voice of the team leader, his tone filled with shock. "It's a hatch, buried beneath the snow. It's jammed, but we're opening it now." Serena felt her heart race. The hatch. It was real. There was something down there. Her pulse quickened and she leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the screen as she watched the soldiers work to free the entrance. This was it. They were about to uncover the truth. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the hatch gave way. The soldiers stepped back, revealing the figure curled up inside. It was a man. His clothes were torn, his body battered by the cold. He was barely conscious, his breathing shallow, but he was alive. "It's him," one of the soldiers said, in disbelief. Raven Dark, the same name from the distress call. Serena's chest tightened. The human they had been searching for, the one who had defied all odds to survive, was here. Against everything he had held on. The sheer willpower it must have taken to survive in these conditions for so long. It was beyond anything Serena could comprehend. And yet, here he was, weak, cold, but still alive. The medics rushed to his side, their hands working quickly to stabilize him. Serena watched as Raven's eyes flickered open, his gaze locking onto hers. Despite his exhaustion, despite the pain, there was a fire in his eyes that refused to be extinguished. "They're still alive," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You have to save them. They're underground." Serena's heart pounded. The human's words had weight, a conviction she couldn't ignore. She had been ready to walk away, ready to dismiss everything as a lost cause. But now, in front of her was a man who had fought against impossible odds, a man who had refused to die, and that more than anything made her pause. "We will," Serena said, her voice softer than she intended. "We'll find them." As the medics worked on Raven, Serena turned away, her mind racing. There was something in her that had changed, something she couldn't quite explain. She had always believed that strength was about control, about discipline, but now looking at this human who had defied death itself, she wondered if true strength was something different entirely. Maybe it was about refusing to give up, Maybe it was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. She wasn't sure yet, but she was beginning to understand that sometimes the rules didn't matter. Sometimes it was about doing what was right. And in that moment, she knew that she had made the right choice.